Hey guys, so today we're going to be talking about something called Brinkmanship, which basically just kind of is the Cold War foreign policy after Harry Truman is president. And really this is kind of all about going to the edge of nuclear war. So we'll talk about what that means. You should have a graphic organizer that looks like this, says Brinkmanship at the top. It's got a little guy running off the edge of your chart over here onto a cliff. I'll explain what that means in just a second. So, what you kind of have to understand about what's going on in the late 50s and into the 60s is America is getting really, really caught up in this whole Cold War idea. And really kind of the problem stems from the fact that the Soviet Union gets atomic weapons, right? And it kind of creates this mass hysteria in the United States and this idea that, this could be the end of the world, right? And it manifests itself in some pretty interesting ways within the United States, which we're going to talk about in a second here. So let's go ahead and jump right in. We're talking about something called MAD. So this is kind of the idea here. MAD is mutually assured destruction, okay? So basically, this comes from this idea that the USSR, like I said, gets atomic weapons, right? So for a while, it was just us, and we thought we were pretty cool being on top of the world with our atomic bomb. However, as soon as the Soviets get it, suddenly everything gets a little scarier, right? We're a little bit more upset, a little bit more concerned. So basically, the idea behind mutually assured destruction is if we get bombed, we can bomb you right back, right? So let's think about it this way. That term, mutually, together, assured, it's going to happen, destruction, right? So together, we're going to make sure that everything goes up, right? So the idea is we are assuring the American people, like, look, we might get bombed by the Soviet Union, but if we do that, we're going to bomb them, and we're going to basically all go up in a blaze of glory, and we're going to take everybody down with us. So this is also called massive retaliation, saying, like, if you bomb us, we're going to retaliate by massively, destroying you as well. So the idea is that we've both got our fingers kind of hovering over the big red button, and it's just a matter of who's going to push it first, right? The goal is actually deterrence, right? To prevent them from bombing us or prevent us from bombing them. The idea is that nobody wants to be the guy that starts World War III. Nobody wants to be the ones that say, we're just going to blow you right out of the air, especially because what's going to happen is that we're going to get blown out of the air. Like, if we go, you're going to take us down with you, right? So we don't want to be that. We don't want to do that. So it actually kind of keeps the Cold War pretty stable. So even though we're like freaking out at each other and kind of scaring each other, at the same time, it kind of makes sure that we are not going to take that final step, right? That last step that's going to blow everything out of proportion. The result of this is something called brinkmanship. So that's that word I told you at the beginning. We're willing to go to the brink or the edge of atomic war. So if you think about a cliff, right? So this is kind of our analogy for this. Think about you're standing on the edge of a cliff. That's the brink, right? The very edge. And you're looking out over the cliff, and you could fall, you could jump, but you're holding yourself steady, right? You're going to stay as still as possible and make sure you don't fall. So we're basically going to the very edge of war. We're doing everything we can except blowing each other up, right? And it creates this great tension and hysteria within the United States because people basically wake up every day going, is this it? Is this the day I'm going to die? Is this the day that the Soviets are going to bomb us? Is this the day that we bomb them and they bomb us back? Everybody's really kind of paranoid about, atomic weapons and what's going to happen. And you wake up every day with this feeling and this hysteria, like, is my neighbor a spy? Is he working for the Soviets? What's going to happen, right? And like I said, it manifests itself in some kind of interesting ways. Like, this is also an era of big, like, monster movies. If you think about, like, The Blob or, like, the giant insect movies where basically there's this unstoppable force that, you can't control and you can't get away from. That's kind of the idea in the United States. So brinkmanship is, like I said, it's about going to the edge of atomic war, and it's going to kind of freak everybody out, right? So this is just an example of a bomb shelter that somebody might build. Now, sometimes you see movies and you kind of feel like everybody had a bomb shelter, but it was actually the exception, not the rule, right? But the idea of a bomb shelter is that you want to build a place that can protect you from the atomic bomb, or at least the fallout from the atomic bomb. Excuse me. And you want to have everything you need to survive in there. So you see they've got like the bunks to sleep on. They've got canned food. They've got, their blankets and beds. And you see this girl, she's even brought her little kitty cat with her. So the idea is that you have a place where your family can be protected and be safe, right? So this is just a way that the Americans kind of responded to this brinkmanship. So the first place where it kind of comes out is in the Middle East. So imagine where we are now. We haven't really gotten into this yet, but it's the 1950s. The invention of the car is about 50 years old at this point. The car is becoming much more popular. More people have it. So what do we need for cars? Oil, right? So oil becomes a much bigger deal. This is also the period right after the war where Israel has been created as a nation. So 1948, Israel is created after World War II in this area right here, okay? And it was created as a place to give a homeland to the Jews in response to the Holocaust. However, this is also where a group of Muslims, the Palestinians, had their own country. So that's going to create some tension in the Middle East between the Jews and the Palestinians and Muslims in the Middle East. So that's kind of where we are. But it all this first conflict stems around the Suez Canal right here. So this canal had actually been built by the French and the British. And when they controlled Egypt, they kind of controlled the canal, right? However, eventually Egypt is going to get their own independence and the whole canal is going to change. But the canal is really important because it's how we get through the Middle East to the Mediterranean and get to the Red Sea, the Middle East, where oil is and shipping and that sort of thing. So basically, the Egyptian leader, a guy named Nasser, nationalizes the Suez Canal, takes it over by the government, so that the government now controls the Suez Canal and controls who goes in and out, right? You see this political cartoon here, like the British and the French are like, well, hey, wait a minute, what's going on, right? Like you're leaving us, right? He asked the British to end their military presence there. So it was like, hey guys, it'd be really great if you guys could just peace, right? We don't want you here anymore, right? And this is also going to lead to some issues with the Israelis. So the Israelis are allies with the British, right? And they don't want the Israelis there. So there are some battles that are engaged in with the Israeli soldiers, okay? So the Soviets support the Egyptians. So the Soviets are giving arms and money to the Egyptians, while the Israelis are supported by the United Nations. So us and Britain and France, those are the ones who are supporting the Israeli soldiers, right? So this leads in 1956 to what becomes known as the Suez Crisis, all right? So the Israelis attack first after they have been engaged in battles by the Egyptians. And 2 days later, the British and the French forces join the Israeli forces, all right? Like I said, the Soviets are giving arms to the Egyptians. Khrushchev, who is the leader of the Soviet Union at the time, actually threatens to use nuclear missiles on Western Europe, right? So just imagine the tension of what's going to happen here at this time period. So the Suez Crisis could have potentially been World War III in the Middle East, right? Nuclear bombs going off right there. So Eisenhower, who was president at the time, steps in and says, look, man, this is not going to work for us, right? So Eisenhower says, we are going to protect the Middle East from communism. We are not going to allow the Soviets to come in and take over in the Middle East. That's not going to work for us. We don't want oil to be controlled by a communist, right? So we're not going to let that happen. This is basically an extension of the Truman Doctrine, where the Truman Doctrine said we're going to protect Europe. Eisenhower extends that and says we're also going to protect the Middle East from communism, right? So the result that we get here is that Britain and France weaken as world powers. We strengthen as world powers. But it also means that the Soviets have gained an ally with the Egyptians in the Middle East. So you might want to just gain an ally with Egypt in the Middle East, whereas we are basically threatening nuclear war through it, right? Okay. So the result, Britain and France weaken, we grow. The Soviets gain Egypt as an ally in the Middle East, okay? So that's where we are. The next is the crisis in Hungary, all right? So Hungary, if you look at this map, it is surrounded by Soviet nations, right? But the people of Hungary don't really want to be Soviet, right? So basically what happens here is the young people revolt against the communist regime that's been set up in Hungary and the Soviet Union. Mostly students, right? So young people. A lot of times you'll find that these kind of uprisings happen from students because they're the ones that kind of have all the ideals and the new thought processes, and they're the ones that are really willing to kind of fight for this. They're like, I have nothing to lose, right? So this seems great. Like, communism's going to fall in Hungary. This is awesome, right? Like, this is what we want. We want to see communism not happen, right? We pledge to help them. We're like, great job, guys. We're going to help you out. But then we start to think about it. And we're like, wait a minute. If we help the Hungarians, that could lead to World War III. That could lead to the Soviets bombing us, we bombing them. Is this worth it? Is this little uprising in Hungary worth nuclear World War III? We decide that it's not. So in the end, we're like, sorry, man, we can't help you. 30,000 young people are killed in this crisis, and they had been counting on U.S. help. But the U.S. was like, we got to look at the bigger picture here, man. Like, if we help you, the Soviets are going to freak out. We are going to die. This is going to be a mess, right? So in the end, we don't end up helping them, and 30,000 people are killed. So this is going to become important really later on, but we have to remember we're not willing to go to nuclear World War III over everybody. Hungary was one of those places. Next one we have is this little piece of machinery right here. So anybody know what this is? Well, this is Sputnik, right? Sputnik is the very first satellite launched into space, and it is launched by the Soviets, right? So here's the thing, okay? This is kind of scary to us. Now, if you look at Sputnik, right, there's nothing frightening about Sputnik. It's basically a little ball of metal with some antenna on it. Like, what's so scary about this? Well, what's scary about it is that because it is launched, it shows that they could potentially launch a nuke into space that can hit us, right? So it leads to the fear of something called an intercontinental ballistic missile, or ICBM. So basically what this is a missile that can go long distances. You don't necessarily have to have a plane to shoot it in. They can shoot it from their continent to us, right? And this is really, really scary because we don't have this capability yet. We're not able to launch anything into space. We're trying, but we're not quite there yet. And the Soviets beat us. Like, they won the first battle of the space race. Who do we blame for this, right? So let's think about who we could blame. We could blame the government. We could blame the economy, right? We could blame communists, maybe. We could blame the president. No, that's not who we blame. You want to know who we blame? We blame you. We blame teenagers, because you know what happens? You guys don't focus on your education. You go to school and you sleep in class, and on the weekends you go to these dances and you hang out and you go to drive-in movies with your girlfriend. You're not focusing on your education. So this is going to lead to a complete overhaul of American education. They're like, we're going to make sure that our young people, who are the next people who are going to be, getting ready for this, we're going to make sure that they're smart and not stupid. So they completely revolutionize education. They add classes like foreign languages, calculus, science classes, right? The kind of classes that might help us defeat the Soviets, right? Classes where you might need to, maybe one day you're a spy and you might need to speak a foreign language, right? Maybe you're going to be the next guy that works for NASA, so you got to know, major science and math in order to do this. So it increases our science and mathematics funding and education in order to make sure that we're preparing the next generation, right? It's a really big deal. Next thing we have is the U-2 incident, okay? So the U-2 incident begins with a spy plane. So spying was huge during the Cold War. We were spying on them. They were spying on us. We were calling people spies. We were afraid of spies. Spies were everywhere. So there was a plane, a U-2 plane. That's the name of the plane, is the U-2. A spy plane is shot down over the Soviet Union, okay? It was flown by a guy named Gary Powers. He was the pilot. And see, here's the thing. He had this, little pin on him that he was supposed to use to commit suicide if he got caught. That way it would, make sure all the information was safe. Well, Gary Powers gets caught, and he decides to not do that, right? And in fact, he actually admits that he was out there spying. The United States had actually tried to deny, that's just a weather plane. We weren't spying, not realizing that Gary Powers was alive and could tell them, yeah, man, I was actually spying. So he kind of admits what happened. And the Soviets are like, really? Really? This is a weather plane? We don't think so. We've got proof, right? Well, the U.S. is like, you know what? You're right. We were spying on you, but we're not going to apologize. You're spying on us, so why should we apologize, right? So they refused to apologize, and it almost causes an international incident. The U.S. and the USSR, the tension is at its high point. Like, people were afraid that any moment they could wake up and hear that a nuclear weapon is on their way, and we're all going to die. Right? So the U-2 incident really kind of just shows that level of tension that's going on. It's really important, right? So just some pictures here at the top. This is that suicide pen. It had poison in it that he was supposed to take, which he didn't use. This is Gary Powers with a model of his plane right here. This is a picture of a U-2 plane. So you can see it's a really small little plane that he was using in order to kind of get information, collect intel. Gary Powers would actually go on to be killed in Korea in 1977. So when his plane is shot down, he was a U.S. Air Force pilot. So that's that's kind of a big deal that we have here. So last one we have is the covert affairs and the actions of the CIA. Sorry. So the problem with massive retaliation. Not every problem is worth starting World War III over. Think about Hungary, right? We didn't want to start World War III over little teeny tiny Hungary. Like, we would have loved to have helped them defeat communists, but we didn't really want the communists to defeat us, right? So we've got to find a way to be able to handle these situations while at the same time not causing a major international crisis, right? So this leads to the CIA, okay? So basically the goal of the CIA is to get in there, stir up trouble, and get out before anybody knows we were there, right? So the first example that we have is in Guatemala, okay? Guatemala, their government was seizing American-owned land and giving it to peasants. That's redistribution of land. That's a move towards communism. That's going to scare us. But we're not really willing to get into a nuclear World War III over Guatemala, right? The second one is Iran. Their government is taking over oil fields. Again, that seems like a move towards communism. It's also going to threaten our access to oil. We don't want Iran and Guatemala to become communist countries. So, we, rather than fighting all out, we send the CIA in. And here's what the CIA does, okay? So the CIA is going to do secret operations all around the world that's going to protect U.S. interests. So, for example, we go into Guatemala, we sneak in, right? And we help train the local people so that they can overthrow the government and then establish their own government, right? So that way, it doesn't look like we did it. We can like totally give up the blame, like, wasn't us, right? Like, you don't want to bomb us. We didn't do nothing. It was all them, right? But in reality, we're putting a lot of money and weapons towards this. And this is something that doesn't come out until much, much later. The other problem here is we are willing to support corrupt dictators because they oppose communism. Great example is the Shah in Iran. So the Shah in Iran was who we got established after we overthrew the Iranian government. Not a super nice guy. He is corrupt. He is a dictator. He oppresses the people. But he's our ally because he doesn't like communism. Right? So this is kind of the other big problem, is that we're willing to kind of compromise our beliefs as Americans in order to get rid of communism. We're looking at the bigger picture, right? So we look at all of this stuff that's going on, and you can see how, like, the Americans would be on edge, right? There's this constant threat every day that maybe the world's going to end. Maybe we're all going to die. Right? And we don't really want that to happen. So we're going to the edge, to the cliff of that nuclear war, right? And we're looking over the cliff. We're knowing we could jump if we really wanted to, but if we do, we're all going to die. So we don't want to really take that final step. So that's kind of where we are. That's kind of what this is all about here on your graphic organizer. He's going to the edge, right? And he could jump into the waves if he wanted to, but that's a little scary. So we're going to kind of get to see more about the tension and hysteria that was going on in class. So I will see you then. Until then, have a good evening.